This lecture is focused on persuasive storytelling, which is something I've studied and thought about for a long time. It's my area of research. So I'm happy to direct you to additional materials if you, after viewing this lecture, you want more. So, persuasive storytelling is something that is not new to a marketing context. People like Richard Branson have long touted the power of storytelling in terms of breaking through marketing clutter and getting people to love a brand. And these are a few headlines pulled from business publications like Forbes, What is Brand Storytelling 2020, Why Every Sales and Marketing Executive Needs to Master It. This is from Stanford Business, Strong Signature Stories Can Shape More Than a Company's Brand. Another article from Forbes. So this is very topical and something that people have been talking about in a business space for over a decade now. And so we're going to talk a little bit more today about what stories are, what effects they have on consumers and why, some elements of persuasive stories, and I'm going to provide you a more specific storytelling template that you can use as you work on your term projects. So first, what is a story? It features characters, could be consumers, could be a founder, could be employees, pursuing goals over time. Now, that's a very simple definition. We're going to get into what is a story and what is not a story here in a moment, but just keep that at the back of your brain in terms of understanding what defines a story. We see these all over a business context, whether or not we characterize them as stories or not. So in terms of consumer testimonials, this is one I pulled from Yelp describing a consumer's experience at Fork. And you can see it's in narrative format. We stopped in for dinner on Tuesday. I'm glad we made reservations, etc., etc. Sometimes there are images. And this is in contrast to some of the other consumer reviews you might see that feature pro and con list. Pro, the food was delicious. Con, the price was high. That is not a narrative format because we don't have any description of the character pursuing goals. We also see stories on websites or product packages describing the story behind either a brand or the product itself, how it was formed, what the founders wanted to do when they began talking about the company. So origin stories is a name for that type of story. We also see them in internal marketing. What that is messages from company leaders to employees describing the why behind the business. Why do we care about what we do? Zappos is very famous for that, getting people to buy into the story of Zappos as a customer service company rather than a shoe story. We see them in advertisements. We'll have some examples here subsequently describing either a fictional or a real consumer experiencing the product. In terms of selling, professional selling agents can, when they're talking to consumers, describe other consumers' testimonials, their past experiences with products, and investors' pitches. If you go to CrowdRise or other fundraising platforms, oftentimes you'll see a story behind the pitch and why people should buy into this idea that people are seeking money for. As I mentioned before, the term story is used very liberally and often inappropriately. So a description, a tutorial is not a story, walking people through step by step. This is how you use this type of shoe or this type of product. People will talk about their brand story and maybe they mean more the brand mission, sort of a general statement. So if you're ever confused about, is this a story, come back to this definition, this very simple definition. Characters, so is there some kind of person, could oftentimes it's a person, sometimes it's even animals, but for our purposes we're going to focus on people pursuing some kind of goal. They want to achieve some kind of outcome, and then over time. And that over time component really differentiates vignettes, where you have sort of slices of life advertisements, versus a story arc where there are distinct plot points. So here, for example, is an example of what is not a story. And this is oftentimes what you'll see on brand websites when they say, click to see our story. And to John Deere's credit, they're saying our history, not our story, but often brands mistake the two. So here we just have a disjointed description of things that happened in different years. And this is not very engaging, right? So you see this timeline here. This is something that happened in 1937, 1938, 1948, and you can string them together in a story. So you could take this content and turn it into, blacksmith John Deere's story. But as this is presented right now, it is not technically a story. So, why use storytelling in a persuasive capacity? There are several reasons that are well supported by a wealth of research. People tend to think in story and communicate in story. So, you don't have to teach a toddler how to tell stories, but you do have to teach them how to think in terms of logic and fact. The fact that it's innate to human beings means it's easier for us to process. And as cognitive misers that are assaulted with all kinds of stimuli on a daily basis, from a marketing perspective, you want to give people things that are easy to think about. Also, storytelling tends to build trust and authenticity better than other types of message formats, such as fact-based formats. Because they're easier to process, we tend to believe what's coming in story format. A little bit more on that in a moment. And authenticity, as you all know, is king in this modern era of marketing. And most importantly, for our purposes today, stories tend to be persuasive. Even though we typically think about stories in terms of an entertainment capacity, we go to the movies to see stories, even those subtly shape what we believe about the world and then influence what we actually subsequently do as consumers. So if we can harness this persuasive power of storytelling, that this is a message format that people enjoy processing, they think about it more easily, then we're more likely to be effective as marketers. What makes storytelling different, and how is it processed differently from other types of communications? I'm going to talk a little bit about the psychology behind persuasive storytelling here. So there's this process called narrative transportation, which refers to the fact that when we are processing a story, we become mentally engaged in the story world and feel transported into that other place. This is very different from other types of message processing where you're aware of your physical environments. Have you ever sat down in a movie theater, the story starts to roll, and suddenly you feel as though you are in that story world? Then you understand this experience of narrative transportation. Relatedly, the experience of character identification means that when we are processing a story, we view the story world from a character's perspective a lot of the time. This means that we adopt their goals. We want them to succeed if we view them as good. If they're villains, then we're rooting for them to fail. And we experience their emotions vicariously. So when good things happen to these characters, we're feeling good. When they are experiencing challenges and setbacks, we also feel those negative emotions. And why this is important for a marketing context is, again, these are sought by audiences. People find these experiences entertaining. And so if you get people to tune into your marketing messages, you've won half the battle already. But also importantly is they reduce counter-arguing. So consumers are inherently skeptical. We're bombarded with all of these messages that we understand are designed to persuade us. So anything that can help disarm us and reduce our message resistance is also going to help in our persuasive endeavors. So because people want this this engaging state of narrative transportation and character identification, they're less likely to generate counter arguments. This doesn't mean that people blindly accept everything, but on average, people are more open to being persuaded by a story than by a fact-based message. And they also feel real. So in this era of experiential marketing, we know that anything that can feel like an experience is going to be more persuasive for consumers than something that is more logical and fact-based that people have to think about more effortfully. What makes a story good, entertaining, as well as persuasive? And both of these are important from a marketing context. I'm sure you've been exposed to story-based advertisements that were not very entertaining or engaging, and so you tuned out after a few moments. Also, I'm sure you've been exposed to very entertaining advertisements that after the fact you wondered, what was that point? How was this building the brand, or what was this trying to do to my beliefs? The equivalent of cat videos, they engage you, but they don't really have any impact on your beliefs. So we want both of these in order to leverage persuasive storytelling principles. So first, we do want to make sure that there is some kind of message, but it is subtle and it is told through the story arc such that consumers make inferences about the point rather than having it overtly, explicitly stated to them. Now, let me give you an example. So here we have Allbirds shoes. I could tell you the founder story such that Tim Brown, he's a former New Zealand soccer player, he became frustrated with the fact that there weren't modern logo-less designs on the market, as well as the fact that there weren't any shoes that were made from environmentally sustainable materials, because a lot of the shoes that are made use toxic chemicals and materials that are just really awful. They have this caustic chemical smell, and so because none of these existed, he couldn't find them. He became frustrated with that fact and started manufacturing Allbirds, which are made out of wool. They use this environmentally sustainable material of wool. And by giving you this background story, I don't tell you, I don't assert Allbirds are eco-friendly shoes. You can infer from that story, that because the founder couldn't find these materials, these shoes that feature these materials, and consequently created these shoes, okay, Allbirds are made from environmentally sustainable materials. So that's just an example of how stories can allow audience to make inferences about the point that the storyteller wants to make, rather than explicitly asserting it. We also want interesting characters that the audience wants to watch for however long it is, or read about, for several paragraphs, or watch a 30-second ad. Now, this doesn't mean that the character can't just be an everyday person. Oftentimes it is, right? An everyday consumer, but we have to show what they want to achieve. We have to feature something called the landscape of consciousness. What are their desires? What are their goals? What are they feeling in response to certain situations, rather than merely describing the landscape of action. So I could tell you about what a character did and what happened. That's the landscape of action, versus I could tell you what the character thought as this action unfolded, what the challenge was when they set out to achieve their goal. So again, the Allbirds story, Tim Brown, he was frustrated with the fact that there weren't a certain type of shoes on the market. So that's giving you a little bit of insight into his motivation and what he wants to achieve. Studies show that featuring these types of details and stories draw people in more so than simply describing what characters do. So here are the Allbirds founders, Joey Zwillinger on the left and co-founder Tim Brown on the right. I told you more about Tim Brown, a little bit more about his background, what he wanted to achieve, but I didn't tell you anything about Joey Zwillinger. So if I told you this story and described these two co-founders and what they did, you'd automatically, by virtue of knowing what it was a little bit more about Tim Brown, be interested in his side of the story versus Joey Zwillinger. So this is just to illustrate that by giving you a little bit more insight into characters' psyche, and it doesn't have to be a lot, just a little bit of information about what it is that they want and why, that makes stories more engaging. We also need a plot that features some kind of conflict. So if everything is fine, if I tell you about an average day where someone woke up, they went to work, they went to school, everything was great, they went home and went to bed, that's not very engaging. We as humans are wired for conflict. We pay attention to conflict. That's what attracts our attention and what sustains our interest throughout a story. Now I'm going to walk you through a few steps that can help you in telling a persuasive story, both for your project and more broadly. And again, this is just a framework or a template. You can take creative license with this, but this might help you get started. So first, you want to position the target consumer, or whoever the protagonist is, whoever the character is, at the center of the story. They're the quote-unquote hero. Who are they? How would you characterize their ordinary world? What do they want? Get a little bit of insight into the character so that people become interested and want to follow them across the story journey. Then, what is it that they want to do more specifically in this story? So with step one, it's who are they? What do they want broadly in life? Are they, a mom who wants to provide the best for her children? And then maybe in the specific story that you're telling, wants to provide a meal that her child enjoys and is both nutritious, and easy to prepare. So you can see going from the broad in number one to the specific here in number two. So what is their desired transformational state? What does he and she yearn for? What is missing? What would make them a better person? So this desired outcome. And then that takes us to number three. What is the thing that's holding them back from this transformational state? Is it something environmental? Is it that a consumer doesn't have enough time? Is it another person? Is someone having challenges with a coworker? Who is the villain, and what is the circumstances that prohibit the achievement of his or her goals? And we also need to have a little bit of a sense of the stakes. So what happens if this goal is not achieved? So within the mom example, will she feel like a bad mom? Will she feel as though she's not caring for her children? Next, we need to think about the plot points. What does the character actually do that takes them outside of their regular day-to-day life and starts them on this story experience, the impetus for action? Let's go back to the Allbirds example. And Tim Brown, he realized that there wasn't a certain type of product on the market, and so that is what started his journey in founding Allbirds. We can also describe fellow companions. So with the Allbirds example, Tim Brown found a co-founder, Joey Zwillinger, who was good at certain aspects of business that he wasn't able to handle. And the climax in the story, it's the one thing, the highest moment of tension that challenges the hero. He or she must tackle it, and it serves as great risk, but then there's great reward. So in this context of the Allbirds example, with the story, the founding story, the challenge is getting the product to market, getting consumer acceptance. And there can be subsequent stories after this, but here the climax was, will there be consumer adoption, or will the co-founders fold and go back to doing what they did in their everyday lives beforehand? And then with our story, we want to show what is it that the hero got at the end? What is the reinforcement factor? Does he or she share the rewards with others? How is he or she transformed? So in the standard consumer testimonial example, the consumer has a problem, they use the product, and then look, the product solves the problem. Here's a screenshot of the Warby Parker founder story, which exemplifies some of these steps. So it's told from the perspective of the founder. So already we've got the character at the center of the story. So we, ours, we're using these pronouns that indicate whose perspective this is being told from. And this story really describes how they encountered a problem and set about solving it. So the desired outcome is having eyewear that is good looking, but also not too expensive. And the way that this story was catalyzed was that they went on a backpacking trip. The glasses broke, there was a problem, and they thought, hey, we could be the solution here. We could create a business that produces eyewear that's good looking, inexpensive. We're having this problem. Other people probably have it too. So, and then the journey of starting the business and creating this eyewear company, and then leading to the outcome of its actual existence. So it's very simple, but we've got all 5 steps of this process here. So that's a founder story example. And as I've mentioned in the past, consumer testimonials are a really great example of a persuasive story that have all of these steps in it. So where there's a consumer who has a problem, they find a product, they use that product, which then satisfies the issue that the consumer had. The overall persuasive message being this product solves a type of problem that the consumer faces. So this is just a very brief overview of the process of persuasive storytelling. I'll have more examples online. If you'd like additional resources, or if you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to talk about this with regards to the product, or the project rather, and in general at any point.